Hey, thanks for checking out the Insiders podcast. And if you haven't already, please click subscribe. We've got new interviews dropping every week. For more details, check out distinctmedia.ca. Welcome to the podcast, Sybil.
Hey, thanks so much, Michael. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Finally catching up. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
I'm Sybil Taylor. I'm a cannabis professional, mother, wife, entrepreneur, and I was a lapsed cannabis user, but I'm back at it. Having worked in the alcohol industry for 26 years, I tended to go to alcohol for recreational enjoyment, but happy to be back in cannabis again and enjoying myself and proud of the products we make, and I also love the sort of health aspect side of things. So I'm at a different phase of life, being in my late 50s now, and have deep respect for what this industry is doing.
Nice. Well, let's talk about your professional career chronologically, if you would. I won't go all the way back, but I guess I'll start with Steamwhistle because that was obviously a big portion of your professional life in marketing. You spent 18 years at Steamwhistle, according to your LinkedIn account. Can you tell me about your role and the evolution of that within the company in that time?
Sure. I had worked with my husband and a bunch of other people that started Steamwhistle for almost a decade at the Upper Canada Brewing Company. And that went public and was eventually bought out by Sleeman, and they closed it down, and 110 of us lost our jobs. So we did other things for a few years. But Greg and some cohorts started writing the business plan, and frankly, I couldn't stay away. And we had really young kids at the time and a big mortgage and whatever. So it was a bit dodgy, risky for us personally to both be working together in a new startup, but it was very exciting. And it was really at the early stages of the craft renaissance, if you will. I mean, there'd been hundreds of craft breweries around North America and the world really before Prohibition. But in the 90s, when we started writing the business plan for Steamwhistle, it was really early days for craft. And so it was pretty exciting. And I was the first employee there, so I helped to bring that brand to life and to launch it. Ultimately, we had 13 people working in marketing. We did everything pretty much in-house, from social media, PR. We had graphic designers, trademarking, events, etc. And we had a lot of fun, I have to tell you. And, I'm really proud of the work we did. We were pioneers in the industry and laid the groundwork for now. I think there's something like 800 craft breweries or more, maybe 1,000 by now in Canada. And so as one of the earlier entrants, we set the stage for how you connect with customers, the kind of branding we did, vintage vehicles, the events, our whole space downtown at the Roundhouse really has, I think, created almost the framework of how craft breweries connect. And I feel a little funny, making such a claim, but we've been told that time again and again that, we set the stage for things like art shows in a brewery or music concerts, and just the fact that we had a big event venue and hosted 85 weddings a year. I mean, that kind of stuff is happening more and more. And I think even coming over into cannabis too, right? And you certainly see that in the US, and I'm excited for the day when those kinds of experiential activities can happen on premise for cannabis companies. So it's been a great ride. I've really enjoyed the entrepreneurial aspect of it, working with my husband for 26 years, day in, day out. I mean, not everybody can do that, but we really thrived working together. We're both entrepreneurial, and Steamwhistle was really like our third child.
Just to clarify, what was your husband's role with the company?
Oh, Greg Taylor. He was one of the co-founders, and they kind of ran it jointly, like Ben and Jerry, he and Cam. He's actually back at the helm there again as CEO, just on his own now. And after both of us working in cannabis for a little while.
Nice. Well, you went from director of marketing to director of communications. So how did your role change from one to the other?
It's funny, we had a very flat hierarchy there. There were no VPs or, EVPs or any of the chief anything. Everybody that was director sort of reported directly to the president. So Over my history of 18 years, 3 times I ran marketing there, but I took a step back. At one point, I was working really part-time when our kids were little. So for
Mhm.
6 years, I was working part-time. Then I went back. And then as other people came and went over those 18 years, I'd step back in the seat of running things there.
Okay.
And in the last few years I was there, I was really just focused on communications. So PR and corporate affairs, if you will, corporate social responsibility, and had a team of 3 working with me there. So social media, any connection with the customer, that was through my team.
Okay. Incidentally, Steamwhistle is delicious. I like it. It's one of my
Thank you.
favorites.
Yeah, I like
Okay.
it.
So after 18 years, you stepped out of the alcohol space and eventually found yourself in cannabis. I think your first role was very brief, but with a company called Nuvera. What did you do
That's
with
right.
them?
So I was Chief Marketing Officer for Canada. We were launching a medical cannabis company that had a global platform. They were really interesting, smart people that worked there. It was a small team, just 12 of us globally, but we were laying the groundwork, working really early days in Europe to get licensing there. We had the ex-Canadian ambassador to Israel working in Israel and parts of Europe. We had the ex-business development person for Uber Europe,
Wow.
working with us, doing business development all over the globe. And we established some pathways into Germany. We had a really bright guy in Germany who we were one of the first applicants into Germany's call for cannabis cultivators. So we established a clinic there, cultivation facility, etc. So Greg, my husband Greg was the president of Canada for Nuvera, and he brought me on as the marketing person because we
Wow.
worked decades together, and we only worked there 4 months, I think, before the company went public, and then it was bought by Afria.
Freya, yeah.
And I think our biggest asset was a really sophisticated lab in Brampton that was both an extraction facility as well as preparing to do derivative product manufacturing. And at the time when we first bought that company in Brampton, they were also doing laboratory testing for others. Once we owned them and we were associated as an LP that was going to be introducing our own products, they sort of stopped doing competitor laboratory work. That didn't work. That didn't work, for the business model. But it was a really interesting platform. It was very sophisticated, super technical, bright people, and it was a good introduction to cannabis for me, for sure. It was really early days. It was long before legalization on the adult use side.
Okay. And then for less than a year, I believe, you opened up your own company to do marketing, and presumably in the cannabis space, and then eventually dropped into Medipharm Labs. Can you talk about that? Were you recruited? Did you know Pat in advance and Keith?
So after we left Nuvera, Greg and I spent a couple of months with some other partners just poking around the space. We probably took 100 meetings with different people in the cannabis industry,
Wow.
whether it was on the investor side or looking to partner in JV with other existing LPs. We had dreams about creating our own products with the impending legalization, the adult use side. That's what we were used to, building brands and maybe ultimately creating some beverages or edibles. And so we were having a lot of talks with potential partners. And I think it was in May of 2018, within one day, 3 different people, unrelated, sent us the Medipharm Labs pitch deck. And so we thought we better go see these guys. So in short order, we drove up to Barrie and had a tour. And I was just instantly taken by the place. It looks so different than every other facility that we toured. They weren't cultivators. They were this very sophisticated science lab. They were not unlike the lab that Nuvera had owned in Brampton. So I recognized the sophistication, the investment in technology, and this true pharma perspective. And coming from Steamwhistle, where our slogan was do one thing really, really well, I instantly recognized that what Pat and Keith, had in mind was this complete devotion to quality and a really singular focus on just the extraction process and then what they were going to do with those concentrates. And it was kind of funny because, Greg and I we hadn't planned for this to happen, but because we were bought out pretty quickly at Nuvera, I had a little chunk of change in my pocket, and Greg went out and bought a sports car, but I invested in Medipharm. And I just thought these guys were so different from everybody else we've met. I believed in them, and I love their energy. You've met both of them. You've interviewed them. And
yeah, they're great guys.
They just have such energy, and they're legit. They're like small town guys that are real people, and they weren't just in it for the flash in the pan, like quick, make some money and get out. These guys really wanted to operate a wonderful company, and so pretty quickly they started asking me if I'd come and work with them. They didn't have anybody doing full-time marketing at the time, and initially I was just doing consulting for them, and then perhaps a month or two later I became a full-time employee. Nice. And it was thrilling to be back at the beginning of a startup, for one, but also to be at the beginning of a groundbreaking industry, not unlike the way I had been at the beginning of craft beer, the craft beer revolution. So it was a lot of fun. I mean, my kids were grown up, they were off at university, or one lived out in Vancouver. I actually had a little bit more freedom now to kind of dive in as a career professional, and just devote myself to it without a lot of family obligations. And so that's what I did.
Nice. Must be nice. I have a 7 and 8-year-old boy, so I'm waiting for that day to come back again.
I do not know how you guys are, like, with young people are managing in COVID. What a challenge. Like, hats off to you.
The secret is to wake up early in the morning, beat them out of bed, and get work done. No, I remember talking to Pat in particular, and he was explaining sort of the origin of the company and the conversations that they had. And that's one thing I'll say. He was very genuine. And also it seemed to me that he was very, very focused on what they wanted to accomplish. It wasn't like we're doing 10 different things. It was, we're doing this.
I had deep respect for that. Yeah. You see now what's happening 2 years later, where companies like Aurora or Canopy kind of blew their brains out, like growing all over the world, buying dozens of companies, and it becomes unmanageable. And so I had a real respect the way these guys were focused. They were being prudent in the way they were spending money. And, it was a little bit giddy, the origins of the cannabis industry, with, the Ontario Securities Commission kind of changing rules a little bit and allowing companies to go public before they were even generating revenue and whatnot. It was giddy, the amount of money that was coming at people. And for me, having worked at most of my career in private enterprises where money's super tight and things move a little bit more slowly, and you have just a few dozen shareholders perhaps that are you're working with, but to be given a key to the bank, essentially, I was actually quite respectful of the way they were very carefully spending their money and investing in this pretty sophisticated platform and very bright people that they were bringing on the team.
Right. I think giddy is an understatement, but I know what you're saying for sure. The hype was massive. I want to talk a bit about marketing and what you do now, if that's okay. Dig a little deeper. Just starting with your history. You went to school, took marketing and finance between 83 and 88, roughly. So this is pre-internet. This is pre the way that we do things now. So talk to me a little bit about sort of how you started in marketing, how it's different, and how you evolved and actually managed to teach yourself how to deal with all of the new technology that we use today.
Sure. So early in my career, I was given a book by one of my bosses, and it was called One-on-One Marketing, Customer for Life. And it was just, to me, that was really eye-opening. It was about being able to have a very personal relationship with every customer, knowing them intimately, understanding their needs, having direct conversations. And, now that's done digitally, but for a long time it was done in person, whether it was actually having field visits, So in my early days at Upper Canada, I started a very robust program for our sales reps to go out and visit all the beer stores, all the bars and restaurants. We were collecting data. They had to fill out surveys and bring that information back to me. And so we had really deep personal connections with the distribution channel. And you know, especially in alcohol, you almost never meet your customer. They're buying anonymously at the beer store or the LCBO or at a bar and restaurant. And so if you're able to create missionaries, you know, they do the selling for you. And so as a marketer, you're really about building the narrative, telling the story, and then telling it so well and so consistently that everybody else knows how to say it for you just as well. And you have to believe in that. You have to back it up. It can't just be a story. The customer experience has to match that. And so I learned sort of early on, if you under promise and over deliver, then you delight people. And so it's how do you continue to do that time and time again? Because as times progressed, you know, in the old days, people would drink the same brand of beer their whole life. They'd adopt whatever their dad or their grandfather drank, and then they'd just carry on because there was so little access to information. But over time, as the internet was born and people started being able to research themselves and they had exposure to so much media, they started questioning things and exploring. And that's not just in alcohol, that's in every category. That no longer did advertising mean everything to the consumer, but referrals from friends or colleagues or experts or media took on a lot more meaning. And so you're only as good as your last interaction with people. You have to protect your reputation so deeply, and you have to live up to expectations that you've set for yourself. And so these principles to me are universal, whether you're marketing beer to consumers or beer to bartenders or cannabis to contract manufacturing partnerships or, you know, cannabis edibles to, you know, an end consumer. So those principles really are universal. So I've had to go about, first of all, crafting that narrative, you know, understanding Pat and Keith's vision, translating that into language that makes sense, both from a professional, you know, B2B sort of story. I also have to, for the first time, be marketing much more publicly to investors, connecting with retailers, and then ultimately to end consumers and patients as well. So there are slightly different narratives, maybe different language, colloquial or scientific, but the messaging has to sort of have the universal principles, right? Yeah. Underscoring all the brand.
So as a professional marketer who's been involved in a few startups now, how do you approach your job? You've got a blank slate in front of you. You're asked to market a product or a company. How do you determine sort of what social streams you want to approach and what avenues of exposure? Like, what do you do when you walk in? How do you look at the situation and go, okay, here's what I want to do, A, B, C, D, E?
Well, there are a number of different methodologies, if you will. There's an amazing video on, I can't think of the name of it. It's like, what's your purpose, basically? So understanding what's the why of a business, not what you do or how you do it, but what's your core purpose. And so it's like a concentric ring of circles. Your why, your how, your what, your where, your when. And so basically I begin by sitting down with the owners or the visionaries of the brand and trying to decipher all of those things and put them into a language or a story. You know, tell the brand story. What are the brand's values? What are the characteristics? What are the personality traits? What are the proof points that kind of convey the story? You can't just make claims without backing them up. And so it's about, first of all, talking to the visionaries, but then it's talking to everybody else in the organization and understanding how their part in that ladders up to support the vision and the values. And I think initially I spent almost as much time, because we, you know, in the early days of Medipharm, we weren't even public. We didn't have our sales license. We weren't even making products and selling them. We were making them and early days of product development and testing and optimizing, you know, our methods and so forth. behind the scenes, but we weren't yet a public entity
Mm-hmm.
in terms of
Mm-hmm.
connecting with customers. So I probably spent as much time on internal marketing. I had to craft that story and narrative. Then I had to tell it to everybody else in the organization, because they in turn were conveying it to their new employees they were hiring. They were connecting with suppliers, making sure that everybody that was supporting Medipharm was doing so to the same tune. So are we buying the right equipment? Are we aligning with the right suppliers that share our ethos? Are we treating employees, you know, right in the vision of how Pat and Keith want to, how they imagine this company? And so whether it was signage or helping to facilitate kind of strategic planning and helping all of the employees, at the time we probably only had 30 employees or something, and of course now there's 230, but in the early days we actually gathered everybody together, whether they were an entry-level chemist or production tech or some of our leadership team, and actually together formulating what do we stand for, what are our values, how do we see ourselves in the future? Because if everybody hasn't bought in to that goal and vision, how can you ever possibly achieve it, especially an organization like ours, which is so rooted in quality that you need absolute passion and commitment so that everybody's living up to those high standards day in and day out. So,
I like that. One key takeaway I got there was with a startup, you really have to focus internally as well,
yes,
perhaps
absolutely.
more so in the beginning than externally.
And
Get
I
the team
think
on board.
that was our success at Steamwhistle. We actually coined the phrase the good beer folks, which was right on our packaging. So it's about making good beer, but it's also the good people that work there. And I really respected the way Pat and Keith created that same kind of culture here, that even before we made a penny of revenue, Pat put in place this really robust fringe benefits package that maybe we weren't, as a startup, able to pay top salaries, but he knew that we were not only, you know, requiring everybody that was working with us to sort of work crazy long hours and really devote themselves to the startup, but that was impacting the families as well. And so, you know, I respond to that kind of thing, this respect that they were showing their employees. They also, right from the get-go, allowed every one of the people at the company to receive share options as part of their compensation, so that we were all walking in each day as owners, very invested. And we had done the same thing at Steamwhistle. We had an employee share purchase plan, so that, you know, some people might only have $100 of shares, but other people invested quite considerably. But it changes your mindset when you walk in the morning. You feel pride. You're invested personally, emotionally, and it was great early days. It was fun, you know, and it still is. It's harder perhaps because times are a little tougher in cannabis right now, but
Sure.
there was so much optimism in those early days, and they created that, Pat and Keith. They really did.
Mm-hmm. Well, from my perspective and what I do, I loved the last few years. There was so much hype. It was so exciting. Everyone I talked to, didn't matter what they were doing, it was interesting, and there is a lot of belief in the future of the space. And obviously it's going to be around, but there are some changes taking place. I want to talk to you. I mean, I guess Medipharm and your marketing focus is more probably B2B than anything. And one of the things that you do very, very well, and I think I even sent you a message like a year ago saying, I really love your content, but you guys really handle LinkedIn well. Can you talk to me about LinkedIn and why you use it?
Well, because we're a B2B company, we have to connect with professionals, right? To make partnerships, whether it's for bulk concentrates or an ongoing, you know, brand development work or whatever. And so LinkedIn is one of the few channels where you can actually market directly to very specific companies. You can market to different decision makers within a company, because everybody's loaded in all of their details. They tell you exactly what their position in the company is, and through their sponsored ad program platform on LinkedIn, you can really be specific in your targeting. And so my job really was to first of all build out the website and then start creating content that showed Medipharm Labs as a thought leader. So we've probably published, I don't know, 40 pieces of content this year alone, whether through blogs or deep dive on different pages on our website. And so it's been tough for sure, where you can barely market within the confines of the Cannabis Act, and make very few claims. And we have a 4-person Canadian regulatory team, and then we also have 2 people in Australia as well. So I have a team of, you know, rigorous regulatory folks that keep an eye on everything I'm publishing, and we also have 2 in-house counsel here in Canada and 1 in Australia. So every word that I'm publishing is vetted by these folks, so that we're living through the letter of the law as far as the Cannabis Act. But LinkedIn allows us to actually connect with decision makers, both in you know, the present day customer group, which is licensed cannabis producers, but also our future prospects in CPG or in pharma. And you know, I came already with about 5,000 of my own connections on LinkedIn, just because of the years of speaking at conferences and at colleges and universities, at Steamwhistle and at entrepreneurship conferences. And Pat probably far outstrips me in terms of the number of followers he has on various platforms, and Keith as well. And so when you look at Medipharm, I've probably, with my team, helped to grow, probably have about 20,000 followers on all of our various channels. But when you add in the senior leadership as well, we may probably double that number in terms of the people that we're reaching with our content. And so that's been our primary way of advertising ourselves and connecting, in addition to editorial.
Right. Well, I think that great marketers also create PR, I guess, as opposed to reacting to news. You guys have online events. I think you call them virtual symposiums. You do your own press releases. You mentioned blogs on your website, which are posted quite regularly. How important is it to you guys to create that PR?
It's huge. Well, it's also a requirement as a public company. We have to,
of course, yeah.
You know, send out over the newswire any significant news, but it's just expected of us, and it's the way to connect, and it's also a way to connect to people outside of our immediate domestic market and also our immediate customer base. Cannabis is a really hot topic globally. You know, people are watching Canada because we're one of the earliest frameworks for legalization, and a, you know, developed first world country. So people are really watching us, even though, you know, Uruguay beat us in terms of recreational legalization. But because it's such a tiny market, people, I think, are really watching Canada instead. So outreach, whether it's to the science community, the medical community, the consumer packaged goods, or business and investor marketplace, that's how we connect, is through press releases and editorial and investor platforms and so on. So I spend a lot of time writing branded content and publishing.
Oh yeah, it's obvious. I see it all the time. How do you gauge the success of the marketing that you do? How do you know that it's working and that eyeballs are hitting it? Analytics aside, what are your sort of method? What's your way of doing that? Knowing that you're taking the right approach, or making changes if you think that you're not.
Well, analytics confirm what you're hoping for, right? And obviously we do a lot of deep diving on analytics. It's whether it's looking at sentiment or engagement or followers and shares and so forth. But it's also personal feedback. It's nice to hear when we've hired a lot of people over the last 2 years. You can imagine, I was employee 18, and I think we have like 230 now or something. So when you're interviewing new employees, or when people come on board and they say, wow, like, you guys have the best LinkedIn platform in the industry, that makes me really proud, of course. Or you can tell when the phone's ringing, are we getting leads? Or things like, I've spent time, you know, courting potential awards and recognition. And we've won quite a number of them. So when other people are confirming that you're doing good work, or you're standing out in the industry, you that makes me proud as well. And that third party referral or the third party, check mark, if you will. You can't just be talking about yourselves. You have to court other people to tell your story for you. And so whether it's a journalist that's interested in sharing your story, or an awards program that recognizes you, or speaking engagements, or even strategic partnerships is something that I've worked on as well. And I did a lot of that at Steamwhistle, is finding people that make sense to ally with, because they share your ethos, or they have the same vision, or they're working on the same type of project. So for example, one of the early phone calls that I made was to McMaster University's DeGroote Center for Medical Cannabis Research. How do we establish perhaps a bank of product that we can donate to research or studies? We formed a 4-year partnership with Loyalist College and their Center for Cannabis Research. They have the first postgrad program in Canada for cannabis science. And so we've made a 4-year partnership with them. We donate product for their research center. We host students for tours and lectures. We hire interns, every year, that kind of thing. So to me, it's important to keep those tentacles growing and grow your community as well.
Medipharm Labs is apparently now making your own products. Can you talk to me a little bit about that, what you guys are doing, and also obviously your involvement in it from a marketing perspective?
Sure. So, for the first 2 years of our life, we were a contract manufacturer for others, whether we were selling bulk concentrates to licensed producers, which they would then turn into finished goods, or making finished products directly for others, be it tinctures or vapes and so on. But in February of this year, we launched our own brand, the Medipharm Labs medical line. We have 3 different CBD SKUs, a CBD 25, CBD 50, and then a 25/5. And it was fun for me to actually be able to create our own brand after just doing corporate marketing for the longest time. And we spent a lot of time looking at other cannabis products in the marketplace, but also looking at over-the-counter drugs and natural health products, etc. And ultimately, what we kind of zeroed in on was what Jameson Vitamin does, because we're kind of like that. We're not an adult rec company. We're a medical pharma first, high quality wellness company, if you will. And so I loved what Jameson was doing, that their branding, the parent company Jameson, is kind of secondary to the actual functional product. And we were getting feedback from retailers that, and you saw this in the media too, that brands weren't resonating with customers because
Right.
Partly the Cannabis Act itself is so restrictive in terms of advertising, but also a lot of marketers were trying to be cute and come up with names that maybe sounded like a real word but were misspelled so that they could get around the regulations. And so I think consumers were having a hard time remembering products, that there was a parent company and then there was a brand and then there were sub-brands, and each one of them had their own names. And people just weren't remembering that. And
Yeah.
so we just put the word CBD front and center and loud and proud right on the label. And so kind of like Jameson vitamins, whether it's vitamin D or B or, whatever, iron, it's front and center. So that's kind of the take that we took. And we also added a lot of color to show potency. And so if you line up the Medipharm Labs CBD family relative to some of our other competitors, I think we show up very well. And I've had some random people reach out to me on LinkedIn and give me kudos to how we managed to create a beautiful brand despite these super restrictive regulations. So I'm proud of that.
Nice. Well, I can tell you when I go into the drugstore and I'm looking for vitamins, I usually gravitate towards a section that has the company that I tend to buy from. And then you're right. You just look at, vitamin D. That's what you're buying. You might look at the strength and what it is, but you don't care about any marketing names or anything because you know what it is.
You know what you need. And I think because I'd spent 2 years marketing Medipharm as an entity, as a corporate entity, I'd hoped that our reputation was sort of preceding us for purity, for quality, for trust. And that kind of backed up everything we were doing in terms of connecting with the consumer in terms of predictability of experience or predictability of dosing and so on. So that was fun, but more to come. We're doing some great research and innovation internally at Medipharm in terms of isolating novel cannabinoids and some new formats coming. And as well, we are kind of dipping our toes into some other product lines that are coming. So watch and learn.
Nice. Well, I can tell you, as a person who I felt like, to a large extent, I had my finger on the pulse of the cannabis space. I'm talking to people all the time and reading as many articles as I can. When rec became legal, it was very, very ambiguous, even for a person who feels like they have a basic understanding of the space. I would go into stores and go, whoa, there's just too many products that are too ambiguous, and I don't know who's making what or what it means. Or so I think that's the right approach. We've gone too big, and I think we need to bring it in a bit. From a macro perspective, do you have any insights or advice for people who are doing marketing in the cannabis space?
I don't know. I guess for me, it's about connecting with all of the different personas. And I mentioned there are so many, right? There's patients, there's recreational adult use consumers, there's wellness consumers, there's investors, there's CMO partnerships, there's academic and research institutions. There's so many different people that you have to market to, and even government. You have to, work closely with regulators and municipal governments and so on. So it's about understanding those different personas, understanding their viewpoint, figuring out what element of your story is going to resonate with them, and then finding the right channels or media to connect. These are universal marketing principles. And for me as well, I'm a relatively new entrant to cannabis, and just in the last few years, where there have been a lot of people that have been lobbying and advocating for decades for this product to be more widely available. And it's also about finding those people that have that passion and that deep knowledge. And I've had to spend a lot of time within our facility just even understanding the science of cannabis, and I have deep regard for the researchers and the quality team that work here. And so a lot of it is educating yourself as a marketer so that you're not making foibles, you're telling real science stories, and also putting it in terms that are understandable, especially to the new cannabis users who are a little bit skeptical and whatnot. So it's about understanding the psyche and the needs of different groups that you're marketing to, I guess, and being truthful.
Standard stuff. How do we find out more about you online or contact you should somebody be interested in doing that?
Sure. So, LinkedIn's probably the most active social account for me. I am on Instagram and Facebook, but I keep my accounts private. You don't need to see pictures of my kids or my cat, I think. But LinkedIn, Sybil Taylor on LinkedIn, and you're welcome to email me at Medipharm, staylor@medipharmlabs.com. And Medipharm itself is active on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. And we have a pretty robust website, and there is an intake, contact us page there that channels you off to different people in our organization, depending on what your interests or needs are. So, yeah, we welcome anybody getting in touch.
All right. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Michael. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Insiders Podcast. We take no responsibility for inaccurate details or facts. If something interests you, we're glad to have brought it to your attention, but please take the time to research the details for yourself.